Welcome to Hauntales, where darkest stories come alive. I know many of you tune into these tales to drift off to sleep, so settle in, relax, and get comfortable. Whether you're lying in bed or curled up on the couch, let the whispers of these chilling encounters carry you away. Before we begin tonight's story, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling tales, and let me know in the comments where are you listening from, and what time is it. I love seeing how far our stories travel. For the best experience, use your headphones, close your eyes, and let every word sink deep into your mind. Now we begin our stories for tonight. Story 1. Shadows at the Door. When I first saw the house, it was framed by the blush of a late autumn evening, shrouded in the soft, golden haze of the countryside. I told myself that this secluded Victorian manor was exactly what I needed, a place where I could lick my wounds in peace. Just me and Max, my loyal German shepherd, escaping the suffocating memories of my former life. The house was old, no doubt. Even with its ivy-clad walls and quaint architecture, there was something a little off, a certain heaviness that seemed to hang in the air, yet I brushed it aside. I was determined to rebuild here. But Max, usually my enthusiastic partner in all new adventures, approached the house with hesitation. He sniffed the air, his ears twitching in that instinctive way of his, and let out a low, uncertain growl as we stepped inside. The entrance hall was dim, the shadows already stretching long despite the sun outside. There was a quietness that went beyond the usual silence of a rural home. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath. I dismissed the shiver running down my spine as exhaustion, grateful for the isolation. But even on that first day, I had a strange feeling that I wasn't alone. Max didn't help matters. He kept glancing into corners, staring into empty spaces with a fixed, intense gaze. A couple of times he even backed away, his body tense, eyes dark and watchful. I told myself he was just adjusting to the new place. "Come on, Max," I said, clapping my hands and trying to inject some cheer into the stillness. "It's just us, we'll get used to it." His only response was a long, mournful whine. The days passed slowly. The countryside was eerily silent, no distant hum of traffic, no friendly neighbors dropping by. Just me, the trees outside rustling in the wind, and Max's increasingly peculiar behavior. He'd sit in the middle of the kitchen, his eyes fixed on an invisible point above the stove. When I tried to coax him away, he would whimper and slink to my side, refusing to look back. Then came the nights. The creaking started as a mere curiosity, the occasional groan of floorboards, the sighing of ancient pipes. Old houses make noise, I reasoned. But soon the sounds became rhythmic, purposeful, as if someone or something was pacing through the hallways just out of sight. Max would growl, his body rigid, and his hackles raised every time those sounds began. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps outside my room. Slow and deliberate, they traced a path down the hallway, stopping right at my door. Holding my breath, I listened as the footsteps lingered there for a heartbeat, before they faded back down the hall. Max, curled up by my bed, was shaking, his eyes locked on the door. For the first time, the isolation didn't feel comforting. It felt like a prison, each room stretching, twisting in my mind until I felt trapped inside the very walls. Sleep became a thing of the past. On the third week, I found something odd beneath the peeling wallpaper in the study. I'd tugged at a loose corner absent-mindedly and uncovered a strange symbol etched into the wall. The shape was jagged, like a twisted star with a series of lines branching from it, spreading out like broken fingers. I traced the lines with a frown, the edges smooth and worn as if touched countless times over the years. "What the hell?" I muttered, squinting at the bizarre design. I couldn't explain it, but something about that symbol stirred a hollow fear in my chest. It felt almost familiar, as though I had seen it before, yet I couldn't recall where. Max stayed rooted at the doorway, whining softly, refusing to enter the room. When I moved toward him, I saw that his eyes were fixed on another spot behind me. But when I turned around, the study was empty. The first journal I discovered was behind a stack of dusty books in a drawer. The paper was brittle, The ink faded, but it told the story of a man who had lived in the house decades before a man who had slowly lost his mind, convinced that his family was being watched, hunted by shadows. He'd written, "They come at night. They watch us from the walls, slipping through the cracks like smoke. No matter where I go, they follow. I see them even when I close my eyes." I felt a sickening drop in my stomach as I read those words. The descriptions were too familiar. The same sounds, the same oppressive feeling, the same eyes I felt on my back when I wandered the house alone. That night I lay awake, paralyzed as the house seemed to breathe around me. The silence was thick, and when the footsteps returned, they were heavier, closer. I could feel each one reverberate through the floor, shaking the bed frame. Max started barking wildly, his paws scratching at the door as though he wanted to dig his way out. When I mustered the courage to open the door, there was no one there. Just the same empty hallway, shrouded in shadow. The days turned to weeks, and my sense of reality began to twist and fray, just like the wallpaper I had peeled back. I found more of those strange symbols in other rooms, etched deep into the walls as though whoever had drawn them was desperate to remember something, or perhaps to ward off something I couldn't see. But Max saw it. He would whimper, stare into empty spaces, and snarl at shadows that stretched a little too long or bent in unnatural ways. Sometimes, when I was alone, I heard whispers, murmured fragments, so faint I could barely catch a word. But the tone was unmistakable, almost pleading. Then I found the news clipping tucked into an old Bible in the attic. It was yellowed, nearly unreadable, but the headline sent a chill down my spine. Family tragedy, father found dead, children missing, mother in shock. The story detailed a family who had lived in this very house. One by one, the children had vanished. Their father found dead in the hallway, his eyes wide and terrified, his fingers curled, as though reaching for something. The article ended with a single haunting line. The mother insists her children are still here, hiding in the shadows. As I stood in that cold, dusty attic, Max suddenly began to bark frantically. His tail tucked, his eyes wide with terror, he dashed down the stairs, refusing to come back up. I stared at the news clipping, my hands trembling. I could feel it now, that watchful presence, pressing in on me like a physical weight. It wasn't just a story. The final straw came a week later. I woke to the sound of scratching. Long, jagged scratches gouged into my bedroom walls, running from floor to ceiling in erratic, claw-like marks. Max was nowhere to be seen, and for one horrific moment, I thought he had somehow been taken. But then I found him cowering in the kitchen, shaking violently, his eyes dark with terror. He wouldn't even look at me, instead staring at a shadow in the corner. "Max," I whispered, reaching for him, but he only whimpered, backing away as though I were the very thing he feared. I could feel the spirit pressing down on me, feeding off my fear and my growing isolation. Every time I tried to leave, I would get turned around, the house twisting, leading me back to the same rooms, trapping me within its walls. Each attempt to escape became more desperate, and each failure brought me closer to the edge of panic. I could feel my mind fraying, my thoughts spiraling into dark places. The house was alive, its shadows shifting, hiding things that only came out when I was alone. Max, once my only source of comfort, now seemed lost, as if he too was slipping away. One night, as I huddled in the corner of the living room with Max beside me, a sudden chill swept over the room. The shadows stretched, reaching toward us like grasping hands. Max whimpered, his ears flat against his head, and I felt a bone-deep dread settle within me. Then, in the dim light, I saw her, the faint outline of a woman, her face pale and twisted, her eyes wide and empty, staring straight at me from the doorway. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, only an unearthly silence that pressed against my ears, like the weight of 1,000 screams held back by sheer force. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out as though beckoning me to join her. Her eyes were filled with a hollow, endless darkness, and I knew then that she was the house's spirit, the last victim, the mother still searching for her children. "Please," I whispered, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Max let out a low growl, his body trembling as he stood protectively in front of me. The last thing I remember is her face, inches from mine, her eyes locked on me with a fierce, unyielding hunger. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to pull me in. When I woke up, the house was silent, the shadows still. Max was by my side, his eyes watching me with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. I knew then that we had to leave, that whatever was in this house would never let us go if we stayed. As we stumbled out into the cold morning light, I glanced back, feeling a strange sense of finality. The house loomed over us, its shadows reaching toward me as though grasping at the edges of my memory, already trying to pull me back. But we were free. At least for now. For now. We left the house that morning, the sunlight piercing through the thick clouds in a way that felt like salvation. I remember the sense of relief flooding through me, a weight lifted from my chest as if I had been holding my breath for weeks. I didn't even have a plan, I just drove, heading toward the nearest town with Max by my side, his head resting on my lap, his body still trembling. For the first time since we arrived at the house, he was relaxed, his eyes no longer darting to dark corners or invisible phantoms. It wasn't until I found myself in the heart of a small town, pulling into a run-down motel parking lot, that I realized how exhausted I was. Max and I collapsed into the bed, the scratchy motel blankets barely a concern, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. In the morning, I called the only real estate agent I could find who handled properties as far out as the one I'd just abandoned. My plan was simple: tell them the truth, however unbelievable, and cut my losses. "It's haunted," I blurted out, feeling ridiculous as I said the words. The agent's silence was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then her voice came low and steady, but tinged with something that sounded almost like fear. "You're not the first to say that." My stomach dropped. "What?" "There's a history to that house," she said, her voice quieter now, as if the walls around her might be listening. "It's been empty for years, passed from owner to owner. I've never sold it myself, only heard the stories." I was listening intently now, every detail tightening the grip of horror that had eased only slightly since leaving the place. About 50 years ago, a family lived there. The mother started claiming she saw things, shadows, mostly lurking at the edges of her vision, and she heard whispers at night. Her children vanished one by one, and the husband, well, no one really knows what happened to him. People say she stayed in that house alone, until one night she went mad. The agent sighed. After that, no one lasted longer than a month. Sometimes I'll get a call, just like this one. But the owners leave before they can really explain, leaving the property to fall apart again. I didn't know how to respond. Everything she was saying echoed my own experiences, and a sense of dread stirred in me, realizing that there was nothing I could do for that place. It was beyond help, beyond exorcism, perhaps. Whatever held sway over that house was old, tangled into its very bones. I could almost feel its shadows breathing, stretching out toward me even across the distance. "Just get rid of it," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed. "I'll put it back on the market, but I doubt anyone will take it. That place has a way of finding people, of drawing them back." As I hung up, a shiver ran down my spine. I glanced over at Max, who was lying by my feet, watching me with a quiet intensity that seemed almost human. For a brief moment, I wondered if he too understood what I'd just heard. After all, he had sensed the house's darkness long before I had. The days turned into weeks, and though I was hundreds of miles away from that house, it haunted me still. My sleep was restless, plagued by dreams that were not dreams. I'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling as though someone were watching me, waiting for me to close my eyes again. And poor Max, he was never quite the same. He would bark at odd hours, his gaze fixed on things I couldn't see, his body tense and alert. Sometimes he would wake from a deep sleep, his eyes wide with terror, as though he had been dreaming of the house and its shadows. Then, one night, something happened that made me realize the house wasn't done with me yet. I had fallen asleep on the couch, too afraid to venture into the darkened hall of the motel room. Around midnight, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow and measured, coming from the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped outside my door. "Max," I whispered, reaching for him, but he was already standing, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on the door. And then I heard a faint whisper, so quiet I could barely make out the words. It was a child's voice, soft and pleading, just like in the journals I'd read. "Come back." Neil. I felt a chill run down my spine as the voice repeated, just a little louder this time. "Come back. Don't leave us." I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the door, the handle starting to tremble as though someone were trying to open it from the other side. Max growled, his body tense, his gaze fierce, yet there was fear in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew whatever force was tied to that house had found me. The following days became a haze of paranoia and dread. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt her face looming over me, her hollow gaze peering into my soul, that desperate whisper echoing in my mind. "Come back. We're waiting." Max and I moved from one motel to another, each place growing colder, more oppressive, as though the shadows were stretching out toward us, reaching with unseen hands, pulling us back toward the house. I began to hear her voice even during the day, faint and distant, as though she were calling to me from another room. And always, that single phrase haunted me. "Come back. Don't leave us." I finally reached a breaking point. Sleep deprived and terrified, I realized that I would have to face it, that I would have to return to that house, confront whatever was waiting for me, if I ever hoped to escape its grip. It wasn't just the house, it was a living force, an entity that had latched onto me, growing stronger with my fear and uncertainty. Max and I drove through the night, the highway stretching out before us like a dark ribbon winding through the hills. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I didn't know what I was going to do when I arrived, only that I had to end this once and for all. The house loomed before us in the pale light of dawn, silent and watchful, its dark windows like eyes waiting for my return. The air was thick with the same oppressive weight, but I felt something else, something darker, as if the very walls were pulsing with an unearthly energy, eager to consume me. I stepped inside, Max at my side, his body tense, his ears perked. The silence was absolute, heavy as a tomb. The air was filled with a coldness that seeped into my bones, chilling me to my core. And then I saw her. The ghostly figure of the woman stood at the far end of the hallway, her hollow eyes fixed on me, her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. Her arms were outstretched, beckoning me forward, and behind her, shadows shifted and twisted, forming the vague shapes of children, their small faces peering out from the darkness. "Come back," she whispered, her voice echoing through the empty rooms. "We've been waiting for you." For a moment, I felt paralyzed, trapped in her gaze, as though her presence had reached into my mind, pulling at memories, twisting them, filling me with a desperate need to stay, to join her in the shadows. But then Max growled, snapping me out of my trance. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the nearest object, a broken piece of wood from the floor, and hurled it at her. Her image wavered, distorted, as though rippling in water, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist, screaming in an unnatural chorus. Max barked furiously, his voice echoing through the empty rooms, and I felt a surge of hope, a brief sense that I could break free from her grip. I ran, pulling Max along with me, sprinting through the twisting hallways, the walls seeming to close in around us, the shadows stretching out with grasping fingers, desperate to pull us back. The front door loomed ahead, the first rays of sunlight spilling through, and I threw myself toward it, bursting out into the fresh morning air. The house seemed to let out a final, despairing wail, the shadows recoiling as the sunlight struck them, dissipating like mist. I don't remember much of what happened after that. Max and I drove until we couldn't drive any longer, putting as much distance as possible between us and that cursed house. But even now, as I sit here in another motel room miles away, I can still feel its presence, lingering in the corners of my mind, watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it the faintest whisper, like a breath against my ear. Come back. After putting hundreds of miles between us and that house, I thought we'd left the horror behind. But it seemed to have embedded itself in my mind, like a seed buried deep, only waiting for darkness to grow. I hoped that, with enough time, the memories would blur and fade. Yet each night the fear returned, stronger than before, clawing up from the depths of my mind, bringing with it an unshakable feeling that I was being watched. I'd often wake up in the dead of night, heart pounding, the silence around me suddenly feeling too thick, too charged with something unseen. Max would lift his head beside me, his ears perked, his eyes searching the room. I knew he felt it too. There was an energy around us, heavy and malignant, like the house had stretched its tendrils of darkness through time and space to reach us. One evening, after yet another restless day, I decided to try something different. I found a nearby library and buried myself in books on folklore, haunted houses, and supernatural phenomena. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticed my pile of peculiar books and approached me. "You've been through something, haven't you?" she asked gently. I hesitated but finally nodded, explaining in vague terms that I'd recently encountered something that felt otherworldly. She looked at me with a seriousness that made me feel both comforted and uneasy. Sometimes places carry more than memories. They absorb emotions, the lives of those who lived there. Certain energies become part of the walls, part of the air. She hesitated, glancing around as though the library's walls might be listening. Some people believe that certain spirits, they latch onto the living, especially if you've acknowledged them, you've given them attention, power. Her words hung heavy in the air, sending a shiver down my spine. She went on, suggesting I find a way to sever my connection with the house. A ritual, maybe something to close the door that I had unwittingly opened. That night, I couldn't shake the librarian's words. I had given it power by acknowledging it, and it had followed me because it knew I believed. Every time I replayed the horrors in my mind, every time I felt fear in the darkness, I fed it more. I returned to my motel room, determined to try and break the house's hold over me. I lit a small candle on the bedside table, a makeshift act of defiance. Max lay curled by my side, his gaze steady and watchful. "Whatever you are," I whispered, forcing my voice to stay steady, "I am done with you. You have no power over me. You belong to the shadows of that house, and I'm leaving you there." The silence thickened, pressing in on me. The candle flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. But I stayed firm, repeating the words like a mantra, forcing myself to believe them. After a few minutes, an eerie calm settled in the room. It felt like something was pulling away, retreating back into the darkness. I finally allowed myself a breath of relief, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I had managed to break free. The next morning it dawned bright and clear. I felt an unfamiliar sense of lightness, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Max seemed more relaxed, too, his tail wagging as he trotted around the room, no longer on edge. For the first time since we'd left the house, I felt a spark of hope that things might go back to normal. But that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, the phone rang. The sound jolted me awake, the harsh trill echoing in the silence. Groggily, I reached over and picked up the receiver. Hello? For a moment there was only silence. Then, a faint, distant voice crackled through the line, barely audible but unmistakable. Come back. My heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable, the same voice that had haunted me in the house, the same whisper that had followed me across miles. I slammed the receiver down, my hands shaking, and looked over at Max. He was awake, his eyes fixed on the phone, ears pinned back in fear. A sense of cold dread washed over me as I realized that it wasn't over. It would never be over. No matter how far I ran, how much I tried to sever the connection, the house would never let me go. In the weeks that followed, the calls became more frequent, always at odd hours, always the same whisper. I tried changing rooms, even switching to different motels, but the calls found me no matter where I went. I disconnected the motel phone, but then the whispers found their way into my dreams, as though the house had wormed its way into my subconscious, merging with my thoughts, becoming part of me. Max started acting out again, whimpering at night, pacing restlessly, staring at shadows that shouldn't have been there. I caught glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision, faint shapes that would vanish as soon as I turned my head. One night, driven to desperation, I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do. I went back. I drove through the night, winding along the dark roads that led to the house, a strange calm settling over me as I neared the place that had haunted me for so long. I had come full circle, pulled back like a moth to a flame. The house stood silent and dark, its windows like empty eyes watching me approach. The front door creaked open on its own, as if inviting me inside. Max stayed close to me, his body tense, his gaze wary as we crossed the threshold. I felt the weight of the house's oppressive atmosphere settle over me immediately, suffocating, thick with malice. Shadows flickered along the walls, moving with a life of their own. I took a deep breath, stepping further into the darkness. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. "I'm here. Now leave me alone." The air grew colder, the shadows thickening, pressing in on me from all sides. And then, slowly, a figure materialized in the darkness, a woman, her hollow eyes fixed on me, her mouth twisted into that terrible smile. Her arms stretched out toward me, her fingers curling as though ready to pull me into the shadows with her. "You came back," she whispered, her voice echoing around me. "You always come back." I backed away, my heart pounding, Max growling beside me. The shadows closed in, surrounding us, and I felt the house's grip tighten, as though it was preparing to consume us both. But I wasn't ready to give in. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small bottle of salt I'd brought with me, a desperate measure, but one I clung to with hope. I scattered the salt in a wide circle around us, the crystals gleaming in the faint light. The woman recoiled, her face contorting with rage, her form flickering as though struggling to hold itself together. The shadows trembled, retreating slightly, and I took advantage, stepping back toward the door. Max barked furiously, his voice a defiant echo in the oppressive silence. The woman's figure wavered, dissolving into the darkness, her voice a desperate, angry hiss. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice fading. "You'll never escape." I didn't look back as I crossed the threshold, slamming the door behind me. The weight lifted it instantly, the oppressive energy dissipating as though cut off, and I took a shaky breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. Max and I left that place, our steps hurried, our hearts racing, and this time as we drove away I felt something had changed, like a thread had been severed, a weight lifted. The house still lingered in my mind, its shadows a faint memory, but they no longer held the same power. In the days that followed, the whispers faded, the shadows retreated. Max stopped pacing, his gaze calm and steady once more. And as I settled into a new town, far away from that cursed place, I finally felt a sense of peace. But sometimes, late at night, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I still hear it, a faint echo, like a whisper carried on the wind, a distant voice calling from the shadows. "Come back." I stayed still, listening, my heart beating in my throat. But the room remained quiet, the shadows ordinary and still. I reminded myself that it was only an echo in my mind, a scar left from the darkness I'd escaped. Max lifted his head, watching me with calm, trusting eyes, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I reached down, ruffling his fur. "It's okay, Max," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "It's over. We're safe now." I knew, of course, that some memories never truly die. That nightmarish house might always linger somewhere in my mind, its shadows occasionally stirring in the quiet hours. But I also knew that I had survived it, that I'd made it out with Max by my side, and that somehow was enough. I drifted into sleep that night without fear, without that lingering sense of something waiting just beyond the edge of the light. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild my life in earnest, moving forward with a resolve I hadn't felt since I first left for that house. One final time, as I walked along the quiet streets of my new town, I thought I caught a fleeting glimpse of a familiar figure in a shop window, pale eyes, a twisted smile. But when I blinked, she was gone, like a shadow swept away by the morning light. I smiled to myself, the fear losing its hold, replaced by something steadier. We were free. And maybe that was all the power I needed to leave the past where it belonged, in the dark, where it could no longer reach me. And as Max and I walked on, the sunlight breaking over us, I felt, truly for the first time, that we were finally safe. In the weeks after our escape, I found myself haunted less by the house and more by the echoes of my own past. Moving to that house had been about retreating, severing ties, shedding all that I had built my life upon, hoping isolation could repair me. But facing the darkness within that place had brought something else into sharp focus, a realization that I had been running from much more than a breakup or the residue of a difficult life chapter. I had been running from myself. In moments of solitude, memories of the house would creep back, lingering like bruises, my footsteps through that creaking hallway, Max's frantic barking at shadows I couldn't see, the feeling of being watched by something I could never touch. These memories surfaced unexpectedly, a jolt in an otherwise peaceful moment, and I had to remind myself that they were memories, not realities. There was a part of me that had felt connected to the spirit in the house. In her obsession, her madness, I had seen a twisted reflection of my own isolation, my yearning to hold on to something, anything, rather than face the truth. She had been consumed by her loneliness, and in her desperation she had clung to whatever fragments of life she could, trapping herself in a place that reflected her fractured soul, and I had almost followed her down that path. Almost. Max had been my anchor, my lifeline back to reality. Every time his eyes met mine in those dark corridors, filled with that silent trust, I was reminded of something solid, something real. He had pulled me back, and in that final confrontation I realized that he had sensed the presence long before I did, that he understood the danger even when I was blind to it. I owed him everything, and he, in turn, had saved me simply by refusing to let me slip. The self-reflection was an unsettling mix of humility and clarity. I had gone into the countryside searching for peace, expecting the isolation to heal me, but now I understood that healing came not from retreat, but from facing things head-on. The spirit's obsession with trapping those she'd loved had nearly become my fate as well, had nearly coaxed me into a life defined by avoidance and solitude. It was an image I couldn't bear, a life spent haunted by my own regrets. It was in these quiet moments of self-reflection, in these unhurried days, that I made a promise to myself. I would no longer run from the things that scared me, no longer retreat into shadows of my own making. I had faced down darkness, real and imagined, and had come out the other side. I had learned, above all else, the power of acceptance, not of the past or the things that had haunted me, but of myself. That was the real battle, and one I intended never to lose again. Looking down at Max, I smiled, knowing that in our journey through that dark, oppressive house, we had both changed. It was a journey of terror, yes, but also a journey back to myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Story 2. Reflections of Apathy. I had never been one for grand ambitions. My days blurred together like the endless stream of episodes on the streaming service I paid for with my small inheritance. At 25, I was perfectly content to live in my cramped apartment, surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers, stacks of forgotten laundry, and the faint hum of my TV, a constant companion in my lazy existence. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams, it was just that none of them ever seemed worth the effort. I woke up one Tuesday morning to a dull thud against my front door. I groaned, pushing my blanket off and shuffling to the door, where I found a package waiting. The cardboard was battered and old, as if it had been sitting around for ages before finally being sent to me. I opened it lazily, curious yet indifferent, my mind half focused on the latest season of that show about a group of teenagers battling supernatural forces. Inside the box lay a mirror, an ornate, vintage piece with a gilded frame that glimmered even in the dim light of my apartment. I blinked at it, feeling a flicker of intrigue, but shrugged it off. Just a stupid decoration, I muttered, dragging the heavy object inside. I placed the mirror against the wall, its surface reflecting the chaos of my life, clothes strewn everywhere, dirty dishes piled high, and me, a disheveled mess in a faded t-shirt. The mirror didn't seem to care. It just sat there, quietly watching me, or so it felt. I dismissed the notion as a figment of my overactive imagination and returned to the couch, ready to resume my binge watching. The first unsettling incident happened that night. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering in the darkness. Around 3 a.m, I woke to an icy draft swirling through the room. Goosebumps prickled on my arms as I glanced around, the shadows of my messy apartment deepening in the gloom. As I turned toward the mirror, I noticed something strange. A shadow flickered across its surface, darker than the surrounding darkness. I blinked, wondering if I was still dreaming, but the shadow remained. It looked like a figure, a fleeting glimpse of something that felt wrong. Get a grip, Jake, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. It's just a stupid mirror. I turned back to the couch, dismissing it as a trick of the light, but the whispers began soon after. At first they were soft, almost inaudible, like the rustling of leaves outside my window. I ignored them, hoping they would fade as I sank back into the comfort of my shows. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer. They seemed to call my name, a haunting echo that gnawed at my thoughts. Jake. Jake. I sat up, heart racing, and squinted at the mirror. The shadows danced across the surface, teasing me with secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. I wrapped myself tighter in my blanket and tried to focus on the screen, forcing myself to ignore the creeping dread. The next morning I awoke to the sound of my phone buzzing. A reminder I had set weeks ago about a bill that needed paying. I groaned, rolling over and ignoring it. My life was a series of unfulfilled obligations, and I preferred it that way. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Items began to go missing: my keys, my favorite hoodie, a half-eaten bag of chips. Each time, I would find myself glancing at the mirror, a vague unease settling in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. I was just messy. I probably misplaced them. It wasn't the mirror's fault. But then came the dreams. Night after night I was drawn into dark, twisting hallways filled with shadows that beckoned me closer. In my dreams I would find myself standing in front of the mirror, staring into the depths of my own reflection, which began to warp and twist. My face would contort, the features melting into something grotesque and unrecognizable. Each time I woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced I had seen something, someone watching me from the other side. Finally, I had enough. I decided to research the mirror's origins, even though the effort seemed monumental. The internet was a vast sea of information, but all I found were vague references to it having once belonged to an infamous occultist named Victor Draven. He was known for dabbling in dark magic, using the mirror as a portal to commune with spirits. But as I dug deeper, I found warnings that made my skin crawl. Stories of the people who had owned the mirror before me flooded my mind. Each tale echoed the same theme: they were drawn to its allure, seeking power, wealth, or forbidden knowledge, only to be consumed by the darkness it harbored. The last owner had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The more I read, the more I felt the mirror was feeding off my curiosity, encouraging me to dig deeper. One night, I decided to confront it. I stood before the mirror, the shadows inside swirling like a storm. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. The whispers grew louder, forming words that scraped against my sanity. "Join us. Be like us." I stumbled back, heart pounding. I didn't want to join anyone. I was content to drift through life, wasn't I? But a part of me felt a strange pull, a whisper that promised something I had never allowed myself to crave: power, ambition, purpose. I felt the mirror's dark influence clawing at the edges of my apathy, tempting me to step closer to the abyss. Days turned into a blur. I tried to ignore the mirror, but it haunted my thoughts. I stopped watching TV, stopped eating, and instead spent hours researching Victor Draven and his rituals. The more I learned, the more I understood the dangerous allure of the occult. The idea that I could be more than a lazy, apathetic slacker began to take root in my mind. One night, I couldn't resist any longer. I lit candles in front of the mirror and attempted a simple summoning, just to see if it would work. I called out to Victor Draven, the name feeling heavy on my tongue, and waited. The air grew thick, and shadows danced in the corners of the room, whispering in tones I couldn't quite decipher. Then, something shifted. I felt a cold breeze wash over me, and the shadows in the mirror swirled more violently. My reflection began to shimmer, and I was no longer just looking at myself. I saw a figure standing behind me, a tall man with piercing eyes and an unsettling grin. "Welcome, Jake," he said, his voice smooth like silk but edged with danger. "I've been waiting for you." I felt my heart pound in my chest. "What do you want?" "To help you fulfill your potential. To show you the power you can wield," he replied, stepping closer to the surface of the mirror. "Join me, and together we can achieve greatness." I hesitated, the offer tantalizing yet terrifying. Part of me longed to escape the mediocrity of my existence, but at what cost? The weight of his gaze pressed down on me, urging me to surrender my doubts and embrace the darkness. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Only your soul," he said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "A small price for such power. You would never have to be lazy or unmotivated again. You could take control of your life." In that moment, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, a thrill I had never experienced. The prospect of finally being someone worth remembering was intoxicating. But the stories of the mirror's previous owners echoed in my mind, warning me against the seduction of dark power. "No," I said, shaking my head, trying to push back against the pull of the mirror. "I won't do it." "Foolish boy," Victor sneered, and the shadows around him writhed in anger. "You think you can resist? You are already mine." Panic flooded through me. I backed away from the mirror, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. "Join us. Join us." The darkness clawed at my sanity, and I stumbled back, feeling the coldness of the room seep into my bones. But as I stumbled backward, my foot caught on something an old book one had tossed aside during my research. I looked down, recognizing it as a journal containing accounts of those who had fallen victim to the mirror's dark influence. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed it and hurled it at the mirror's surface. "Leave me alone," I shouted. Look. The book hit the mirror with a resounding crash, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The glass rippled, distorting the reflection until it shattered like fragile ice, sending shards flying across the room. I shielded my face with my arms, heart racing. When I lowered them, I found myself staring at the remnants of the mirror, the fragments gleaming like fallen stars on the floor. For a moment, silence enveloped me, and I dared to hope that I had broken the mirror's hold. But then I heard it, the whispers transformed into anguished wails, rising in a cacophony of despair. I staggered back as the shadows twisted and coalesced, taking form amidst the chaos. The spirits of those who had been trapped reached out, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "Release us," they cried, voices mingling with my own fear. "You cannot escape our fate." Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the door, frantically fumbling with the knob. As I yanked it open, the last remnants of the mirror's influence surged forth, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air, the screams of the spirits echoing in my ears. I ran blindly down the stairs, my heart racing, the shadows chasing me into the night. I needed to escape. I needed to be free from the mirror's grasp. I burst outside into the cool night air, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The city's lights blurred around me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to distance myself from the darkness that had tried to consume me. Days passed, and I tried to forget the mirror, but the remnants of that encounter haunted my every step. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision. Whispers taunted me from the darkness. I was never truly free. I could feel the weight of my apathy pressing down, a constant reminder of the darkness I had nearly embraced. Then, one evening, while sitting in my cluttered apartment, I found myself staring at the empty space where the mirror had once stood. The silence was suffocating. Had I truly broken free, or had I merely scratched the surface of something deeper? I realized I had let the opportunity for change slip away, allowing my apathy to creep back in. In a moment of clarity, I grabbed my phone and began typing furiously. I would document everything: the mirror, the rituals, the spirits. I had to share my story, to warn others about the dangers that lurked in the shadows. It was a small step, but it was a step toward reclaiming my life. As I poured my thoughts onto the screen, the whispers transformed into words, urging me to continue. My fingers flew over the keys, and I began to feel a flicker of purpose. I would no longer be defined by my apathy. I vowed to seek out the stories of others who had faced similar darkness. I would shine a light on the shadows, ensuring no one else would fall victim to the allure of the unknown. The mirror had nearly consumed me, but I had fought back. And in that struggle, I discovered the strength I never knew I possessed. The shadows in my mind would always linger, but now they would serve as a reminder of my journey. I had faced the abyss, and though it beckoned me still, I was determined to rise above it. Apathy would no longer be my prison. I would carve my own path, one that led away from the darkness and toward the light. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I filled my evenings with research, combing through libraries and online archives for tales of the mirror, Victor Draven, and anyone who had encountered its dark allure. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was about more than just a cursed object. It was a testament to the human struggle against our deepest fears and desires. I began reaching out to others who had experienced similar phenomena, finding online forums and communities dedicated to the supernatural. At first, the stories were scattered, each account a thread in a larger tapestry of horror. Some described mirrors that showed more than reflections. Others spoke of objects that seemed to whisper secrets and promises of power. I felt a kinship with these voices, a connection that transcended the distances between us. One evening, as I scrolled through a particularly active forum, I stumbled upon a post from a user named Eliza. She wrote about her own encounters with a cursed mirror that had haunted her family for generations. Unlike mine, her mirror had been passed down through her ancestors, each owner succumbing to its dark influence. Her family was plagued by misfortune, culminating in her brother's tragic disappearance. Reading her account sent chills down my spine. The parallels were uncanny. I quickly drafted a response, sharing my own experience and inviting her to connect. Within hours, she replied, eager to share her story. We arranged a video call, both of us feeling the weight of our shared burden. When we finally spoke, I was struck by her intensity. Eliza had a fire in her eyes that spoke of battles fought and losses endured. "It's been years since I've felt free," she confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. "The mirror took my brother, and I've spent every waking moment trying to find him. But it never stops. My family is still haunted." Her pain resonated with me. I thought I had escaped its grasp, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's like a shadow that never leaves. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, even now." Eliza nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's not just a mirror, Jake. It's a portal. A conduit to something beyond our understanding. We have to close that portal for good." That night, we devised a plan. We would conduct a ritual to sever the mirror's connection to our lives and put an end to the darkness once and for all. We researched protective spells and cleansing rituals, drawing from various traditions. It was empowering to feel like I was taking control, finally confronting the shadows instead of running from them. As we prepared for the ritual, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The thought of facing the darkness that had haunted me for so long filled me with dread, but I knew I had to try. Eliza would join me via video call, providing moral support as we confronted our fears together. The night of the ritual arrived. I set up my small living room as a sacred space, lighting candles and arranging crystals I had purchased online. Each item was chosen carefully, imbued with intentions of protection and clarity. I could feel the energy in the room shift as I lit the final candle, illuminating the darkness that had seeped into every corner of my life. I sat cross-legged on the floor, phone in hand, and Eliza's face appeared on the screen, framed by her own flickering candlelight. She looked determined, her expression a mix of resolve and vulnerability. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. We began the ritual, reciting our chosen incantations in unison. The words felt powerful, resonating through the air like a chant that awakened something deep within us. As we spoke, I focused on the memories of the mirror, the fear, the shadows, the whispers, and visualized severing their hold on my life. With each word, I felt a warmth envelop me, a protective barrier forming around us. The candles flickered violently, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but I pressed on. Eliza's voice was a steady anchor, guiding me through the ritual. As we reached the climax of the incantation, a chill swept through the room. I could see Eliza's expression shift, eyes wide with fear. "Jake, something's wrong," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with panic. The shadows around me thickened, swirling like a storm, and I felt the oppressive weight of darkness pressing in. "Don't stop," I shouted, my voice shaking as I fought against the rising tide of fear. "We have to finish this." With one final, powerful incantation, we raised our hands toward the screen, channeling all our energy into the moment. I envisioned the mirror shattering, its shards falling away like the chains of my own past. In that instant, the shadows recoiled as if struck, and a deafening silence enveloped the room. The darkness dissipated, leaving behind an ethereal glow. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, a warmth that filled the spaces where fear once resided. Then, the screen flickered. Eliza's face froze, eyes wide with terror as the shadows swirled behind her, coiling like serpents. "Jake," she screamed, her voice cutting through the silence. I felt a surge of desperation. "No." "Eliza, don't look away," I shouted, but it was too late. The shadows lunged at her, and her scream echoed through the line before the connection was severed, leaving me in a deafening silence. My heart raced as I stared at the dark screen, fear coiling around my throat like a vice. The shadows in my apartment writhed, whispering promises of despair, beckoning me closer, but I couldn't succumb. I had faced my darkness and had come too far to turn back now. I fumbled to gather the remnants of our ritual candles, crystals, the notes we had taken, and decided to take a final stand. I couldn't let the mirror's influence take another life. I rushed to my kitchen, grabbing a pot of boiling water and a knife. The whispers crescendoed around me, angry and insistent, but I held my ground. "You won't take me," I shouted, my voice echoing in the silence. I would end this, one way or another. With trembling hands, I grabbed the knife and carved symbols into the air, creating a protective barrier around me. Then I poured the boiling water into a bowl, using it to cleanse the space, symbolically washing away the remnants of the mirror's darkness. The shadows writhed violently, and I felt a surge of energy pushing against me. It was as if the darkness itself was fighting back, but I refused to back down. "You will not take me," I roared, repeating our incantation once more, louder and more determined than before. In that moment, the shadows recoiled and I felt a bright light erupt within me. I focused all my energy into one final declaration, envisioning the mirror shattering into a million pieces, sealing away the darkness forever. As the words left my lips, a blinding flash enveloped the room. I felt the warmth of light wash over me, cleansing every ounce of fear and despair. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the shadows dissipated, leaving only silence in their wake. I lay there, heart pounding, feeling the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The darkness had been banished, and in its place was an overwhelming sense of peace, but I couldn't shake the fear for Eliza. I grabbed my phone, praying the connection would still be intact. I scrolled through my contacts, trembling fingers hovering over her name. What if she was lost? What if the darkness had taken her? I hesitated for just a moment before hitting call, anxiety coursing through me. When the ringing finally stopped, I heard a faint voice on the other end. "Hello?" "Eliza," I gasped, relief flooding my veins. "Are you okay? What happened?" "I'm fine, Jake," she replied, though her voice trembled. "I don't know what just happened. I felt something. It was like a surge of energy, and then it was gone." We talked for hours, piecing together our experiences and the ritual. It turned out that when the connection severed, we had both been pulled into a whirlwind of shadows, but somehow we had managed to break free. It felt like a shared victory, our bond strengthened through our struggles against the darkness. In the weeks that followed, I found myself transformed. The mirror's dark influence had been banished, and I was determined to turn my life around. With Eliza's encouragement, I began writing a book about our experiences, weaving together our stories of confrontation and resilience. Each chapter was an exploration of the human spirit's fight against darkness. I included the tales of others I had encountered online, weaving their experiences into a tapestry of survival. I wanted to show that we are not alone in our struggles, and that there is always a way to reclaim our power. Eliza became my co-author, and together we poured our hearts into the project. It became a labor of love, a testament to our journey from fear to empowerment. With every word, I felt the weight of my past lifting, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. As I stood in front of the mirrorless wall in my apartment, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. I had faced my fears and transformed them into something beautiful. The shadows no longer held sway over my life, and I was determined to help others find their light as well. Our book was published, and I couldn't believe the response. Readers reached out, sharing their own stories of darkness and triumph. Some told me they had faced mirrors of their own, while others spoke of different struggles entirely. With each new message, I felt a connection to those who had once felt alone in their battles. I started a blog, inviting people to share their experiences, creating a community of support and healing. The darkness that had once threatened to consume me now became a source of strength. Through it all, Eliza remained by my side. We became friends and allies, united in our mission to shine a light on the shadows that linger in our lives. Together we led workshops and spoke at events, encouraging others to confront their fears and reclaim their power. The journey wasn't easy, and remnants of the past still lingered in the corners of my mind. But I learned to embrace those shadows, understanding that they were a part of me. Rather than let them dictate my life, I chose to acknowledge them and use that awareness to forge ahead. Years later, as I stood on stage speaking to a crowd of eager faces, I felt a surge of gratitude. I had transformed my fear into purpose, helping others reclaim their narratives. The echoes of the mirror's whispers faded into distant memories, replaced by the powerful stories of those who had overcome their own darkness. As I finished my talk, a wave of applause washed over me, and I smiled, knowing that I had turned my struggle into strength. The shadows would always be there, but now they were a reminder of the light I had found within myself. Together we could illuminate even the darkest corners, turning fear into hope and despair into empowerment. The journey continued to unfold in ways I had never imagined. The book we wrote, Reflections of the Dark, resonated with so many people that it quickly gained traction in the literary world. We were invited to speak at conferences and host panels on mental health, resilience, and the power of storytelling. Each invitation felt like a new opportunity to spread our message that darkness is not something to be feared but confronted, understood, and ultimately transformed. The community we built around our shared experiences flourished. People began sharing their stories through our blog, revealing encounters with shadows both literal and metaphorical. Each post was a reminder that we were not alone in our struggles. It created a safe space for vulnerability, and the connections formed through these stories were powerful and healing. One day I received an email from a young woman named Mia. She had read our book and was deeply moved by the themes of resilience and recovery. Her own story was harrowing. She had grown up in a home filled with emotional abuse, often retreating into her room to escape the turmoil. She wrote about how she had stumbled upon a broken mirror while cleaning out her childhood home. The mirror had once belonged to her grandmother, and despite its shattering, it seemed to hold a piece of her family's history, a history of fistery. Mia's email struck a chord in me. She spoke of the weight of her family's darkness, how she felt compelled to confront it and find closure. She expressed a desire to write her own story, but struggled with the fear of re-experiencing the trauma. Inspired by her bravery, I reached out to her, inviting her to share her journey through our platform. Over the next few months, Mia and I exchanged messages, each one deepening our connection. I encouraged her to take her time and write at her own pace. I shared my own experiences of transformation and healing, reminding her that confronting the past could be a cathartic process. Eventually, Mia submitted her story, a poignant and beautifully written account of her struggles and triumphs. Her words poured from the page with raw honesty, capturing the pain of her childhood, but also the strength she had found in herself. I was moved to tears as I read her submission, recognizing the power of her vulnerability. We published her story on our blog, and the response was overwhelming. Readers were touched by her honesty, many sharing their own experiences of similar struggles. Mia found solace in the outpouring of support, and I felt honored to be a part of her journey. As our platform grew, we organized community events, inviting contributors to share their stories in person. We established a monthly storytelling night, a safe haven where individuals could come together to recount their experiences. It became a celebration of resilience, an acknowledgement that healing often begins with the courage to speak out. One evening, at one of our storytelling nights, I sat in the audience, listening to Mia as she stepped onto the stage. She had blossomed into a confident speaker, her voice steady as she shared her story with an audience that filled the room. The energy was electric, and I could feel the collective breath being held as she spoke. I used to believe that my past defined me, she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. But now I know that it's just a part of my journey. I've learned to reclaim my narrative, to take back the power that was stolen from me. As she spoke, I noticed a shift in the audience. Heads nodded in agreement, tears glistened in eyes, and the air was thick with empathy. Mia had not only transformed her pain into strength, but she had also inspired others to do the same. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It was more than just a round of appreciation, it was a collective acknowledgement of the courage it took to share one's story. As Mia stepped down from the stage, she was met with hugs and words of support from strangers who had been moved by her journey. I felt a surge of pride for her. We had both faced the darkness that had threatened to consume us, but together we had created a community where others could shine their lights. The stories we shared became a testament to the power of connection, the way vulnerability could foster healing. As months turned into years, I continued to write and speak about my experiences. Each opportunity felt like a new chance to empower others, to remind them that they were not defined by their shadows, but by the strength they found in confronting them. One day I received an unexpected email from a publisher interested in turning our book into a documentary. The idea thrilled me. Reflections of the Dark would reach a wider audience, allowing more people to hear the stories of those who had confronted their own demons. I eagerly accepted the proposal, and soon the wheels were in motion. Filmmakers came to interview Mia, Eliza, and me, capturing the essence of our journeys on camera. They wanted to explore the impact of the mirror and the stories that had blossomed from our experiences. The filming process was intense. We revisited our darkest moments, peeling back layers we thought we had fully healed. But with each retelling, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I realized that sharing our stories was not just about reliving the pain, it was about celebrating the victories and honoring the resilience that emerged from the struggle. The film crew followed us to our storytelling events, capturing the raw emotions and connections forged in those moments. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter, tears, and the unmistakable sense of community. We were all united by a common thread, the determination to reclaim our narratives. As the project progressed, I began to notice a shift in my own perspective. The more I spoke about my experiences, the more I understood that healing is not a linear journey. There are peaks and valleys, moments of triumph and times of vulnerability. It's in those moments of vulnerability that we often find our greatest strength. When the documentary was finally released, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I had poured my heart into this project, and I hoped it would resonate with others. The premiere was an emotional experience, filled with friends, family, and supporters who had been part of our journey. As the credits rolled, I could feel the collective breath of the audience. It was a moment of reflection, viewers grappling with their own shadows, their own stories. The film sparked conversations, and people began to share their experiences, finding connection in the shared struggles. After the screening, I stood by the exit, greeting attendees as they left. Many approached me with tears in their eyes, sharing how the documentary had touched them. Some spoke of their own battles with darkness, while others expressed gratitude for the message of hope and resilience. One woman in particular stood out. She approached me, visibly shaken. "Your story reminded me of my own," she said, her voice trembling. "I lost my brother to addiction, and for years I felt like I couldn't talk about it. But hearing your journey, it gives me hope." I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of her pain. "You're not alone," I whispered, knowing the power of connection in that moment. We can heal together. As the evening wound down, I looked around the room, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. We had created a space where people could feel safe enough to confront their shadows, share their truths, and begin their healing journeys. The documentary continued to gain traction, leading to speaking engagements at universities and conferences. I realized that the mission had evolved beyond my initial fears. It was no longer just about my story, it was about the collective experience of those who had fought their own battles. Years later, as I sat down to write the sequel to Reflections of the Dark, I reflected on how far I had come. I thought about the people I had met, the connections I had forged, and the impact our stories had made. Each chapter felt like a continuation of our shared journey, a celebration of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light waiting to be found. In the midst of writing, I received a call from Mia. She was bursting with excitement, her voice ringing through the phone. "Jake, you won't believe this. I've been invited to share my story on a national platform." I could hear the joy in her voice. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you," I exclaimed, thrilled that she was stepping into the spotlight. "You deserve every bit of this recognition." We talked for hours, strategizing her approach and discussing what she wanted to convey. "I want to tell people that they can break free from the chains of their past," she said, her passion evident. "I want them to know that they are not defined by their struggles." When the day of her appearance arrived, I watched from home, my heart swelling with pride as she stood in front of the camera. Her message was powerful, filled with authenticity and strength. She spoke candidly about her childhood and the journey of reclaiming her narrative. As the segment came to an end, the host invited viewers to reach out for support if they were struggling. It was a reminder that vulnerability could spark connection and healing, creating ripples of hope in the world. After the broadcast, Mia called me, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't believe I did it. I feel so free. Thank you for believing in me," she said, tears of joy evident in her voice. "You did this on your own," I replied, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for our journey together. "You found your voice, and now others will find theirs through you." As I continued writing, I often reflected on the power of storytelling. Each tale shared was a step toward healing, a way to confront the shadows that lingered. I realized that while darkness may always exist, it does not define us. We can choose to illuminate our paths, transforming our struggles into sources of strength. The sequel, Shadows to Light, became a testament to that journey, a collection of stories that celebrated resilience and community. As I wrapped up the final chapters, I felt a sense of closure. I had taken my darkness and turned it into something beautiful, and in doing so, I had inspired others to do the same. The book launch was an emotional event. Friends, family, and community members gathered to celebrate the release. I was overwhelmed by the love and support, the faces of those who had walked alongside me on this journey. As I spoke to the crowd, I felt a familiar warmth wash over me, the knowledge that we were all part of something greater than ourselves. "Thank you for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "This book is not just my story, it's a testament to the power of vulnerability, connection, and healing. Together we can confront our shadows and emerge stronger." As I looked into the sea of faces, I saw hope reflected in their eyes. We were all bound by our shared experiences, each person a flicker of light in the darkness. The stories we had shared were not just ours, they belonged to everyone who had ever faced a shadow. The applause echoed in the room, and I felt a surge of gratitude. I had turned my fear into purpose, transforming my journey into a beacon of hope for others. In that moment, I knew that while darkness may always be a part of life, we have the power to illuminate our paths and create a community where healing flourishes. As I stepped down from the stage, a familiar face approached me. Eliza, my steadfast companion through this journey, enveloped me in a warm hug. "You did it, Jake. You turned your story into something that will help so many others." "Thank you for always believing in me," I replied, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done this without you." We stood together, looking out at the crowd, knowing that our mission was far from over. There were still stories to be shared, lives to be touched, and healing to be fostered. The journey had transformed us, and now we had the opportunity to inspire others to confront their own shadows and find a light within. As the evening wound down, I looked around at the community we had built, a tapestry of stories, resilience, and hope. Together we would continue to shine a light on the darkness, reminding ourselves and others that even in the depths of despair, we can always find our way back to the light. The echoes of our journeys would resonate long after the night ended, guiding us forward into a brighter future. In the months that followed the launch of Shadows to Light, the impact of our work began to ripple outward in ways I had never anticipated. The stories shared at our events grew in depth and complexity, each one a testament to the human spirit's resilience. New faces appeared in the audience, people eager to share their truths, their struggles, and their victories. One evening, a young man named Oliver took the stage. He was nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his notes. "I've never shared my story before," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I hope that by speaking, I can help someone else who feels lost." As he recounted his experiences with depression and isolation, I could see the audience hanging on to every word. Oliver's honesty cut through the room, revealing the raw vulnerability that so many people felt but rarely expressed. He spoke of moments when darkness threatened to pull him under, but also of the glimmers of hope that began to shine through as he sought help and learned to lean on others. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, clapping and cheering, but I noticed something else, a palpable energy of connection and support. Oliver stepped off the stage, tears glistening in his eyes, and was immediately embraced by several audience members, each sharing their own stories of struggle. It was a moment that encapsulated the very essence of what we had created, a safe space for healing. As the months turned into years, the community continued to grow. We held workshops, wrote more books, and even created an online platform where people could share their stories anonymously if they wished. Each story added another layer to our mission, reminding us that no one is alone in their battles. I often reflected on how far I had come since the days of feeling trapped by my own darkness. It was as if I had transformed from a mere observer in my life to an active participant, empowered by the very stories that had once haunted me. Each time I shared my narrative, I felt lighter, more liberated. It was a catharsis I hadn't expected. One day, as I was preparing for another storytelling event, I received an unexpected message from Mia. She had been invited to speak at a national mental health conference and wanted me to join her as a co-panelist. My heart raced with excitement. This was an incredible opportunity to reach a wider audience and spread our message even further. The conference was held in a large convention center, buzzing with energy and filled with people from all walks of life. When it was our turn to take the stage, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. This was a platform where our words could truly make a difference. Mia and I spoke passionately about our journeys, the importance of sharing stories, and the healing power of vulnerability. As we wrapped up our presentation, we opened the floor to questions. One woman stood up, tears streaming down her face, and shared her own battle with depression. "I've always felt like I was alone," she said, her voice trembling. "But hearing both of your stories makes me realize I'm not." The room erupted in supportive applause, and I felt a wave of solidarity wash over us all. This was why we did what we did, to break down the walls of isolation, to create a community where people could come together and support one another. After the conference, I received numerous messages from attendees expressing how our words had resonated with them. Many shared their stories, recounting moments of despair and triumph, and I realized that we had ignited a spark of courage in them. Each story reaffirmed that healing is a collective journey. When one person shines a light on their darkness, it inspires others to do the same. As the years rolled by, I found myself increasingly immersed in this mission. I published more books, collaborated with mental health professionals, and became an advocate for mental health awareness. Each endeavor felt like a step toward a greater purpose. Eventually, I decided to host an annual storytelling festival. It would be a weekend dedicated to sharing stories of struggle, resilience, and hope, a celebration of the human experience. The first festival was a success, attracting people from across the country. We created a vibrant atmosphere filled with art, music, and of course, storytelling. As I stood on stage during the festival's closing ceremony, looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Each story shared, each connection made, was a reminder that we were not alone in our struggles. Together, we had forged a community that embraced vulnerability and celebrated resilience. In that moment, I realized that my journey was far from over. There were still countless stories to be told, lives to be touched, and healing to be fostered. The shadows that once felt suffocating had become a source of light, a guiding force that illuminated the path for others. As the festival came to a close, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years slip away. I knew that the impact of our work would continue to grow, reaching new hearts and minds long after the lanterns were extinguished. In the years to come, the Storytelling Festival blossomed into a cherished annual tradition, each year bringing together more voices and fostering deeper connections. I found fulfillment not only in sharing my own story, but in witnessing the transformation of others as they stepped into their truth. Ultimately, the shadows I once feared had transformed into a source of strength. They reminded me of the importance of community, the power of shared experiences, and the profound impact of vulnerability. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, but a beacon of hope for others navigating their own journeys. As I continued to write and share, I knew that my story was part of a much larger tapestry, a narrative woven together by countless individuals who dared to confront their darkness. And in that realization, I found peace. Each story, every encounter, and all the connections made had brought us closer together, creating a tapestry of resilience and hope that would shine brightly for generations to come. The journey would never truly end. It would continue to evolve, illuminating the path for those still searching for their own light amidst the shadows. And so, I embraced the journey ahead, knowing that each step forward was an opportunity to inspire others, to heal together, and to remind ourselves that in the end, we are never truly alone. As we reach the end of tonight's stories on Hauntales, it's time to let your mind drift away. Listen to the sound of the rain gently falling in the background. Let each drop calm your thoughts and ease you into a peaceful sleep. There's nothing to fear now, just the soothing rhythm of the rain. Focus on your breathing, let your body relax, and allow yourself to drift deeper into rest. Sleep peacefully, and we'll meet again tomorrow night for another story. Good night.